business benefits that we're working with. So the tagline that we have, we took from Abraham Lincoln. He's got this quote: "If you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 4 of them sharpening an axe." Yeah. So we take that tag and say, "Sharpen the axe."
Hello, and welcome to DC Sharpen the Axe podcast. I'm your host, Luke Anderson.
And I'm your host, James Connolly.
And I'm Mrs. Collins.
Yes. Thanks for coming on today. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, happy to have you on. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born in California, but I grew up in Mexico City. My parents are missionaries, so that's where I spent my whole life. I came up to America to do university, then moved back to Mexico City because it's where I love to live. It's where I'm from. So that's where I've spent most of my life.
That's really cool. And did DC find you, or did you find DC when you became a teacher?
No, I don't know if you know Jim Favino.
Yeah.
His wife is my cousin.
Oh, really?
And that is why I came to the school,
That's
for
really
my
cool.
children to attend DC and to look for a job here.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So when was that? How long you've been teaching for?
Well, I've been teaching for over 20 years, but here
Wow.
at DC, this is my 5th year, I believe.
Yeah, you were our first 6th grade teacher.
That's
so
right. That's been,
Yeah.
I can't believe
I think it's 4 or 5. Yeah.
years go by very fast.
Yeah,
I remember
way
that.
back.
It's crazy.
So we have a quote that we took the title from, Sharpen the Axe. So Abraham Lincoln says, "If you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first 4 sharpening an axe." So tell us a little bit about how in your life you sharpen your axe, prepare for life.
You know, what's interesting about life is that there are things that God puts in your path that start to sharpen your axe and you don't know it.
Ooh,
And
like
I
that.
think looking back, then you're like, okay, I see that path. And something I would say just from early on, my parents being missionaries, and the life of a missionary can be, you have to be very flexible. Things change at the drop of a hat for travel or who you're dealing with or how things pan out. When my parents first went to be missionaries in Mexico, missionaries were illegal. So we were there illegally, and we had to get paperwork every 3 months. We'd have to leave the country my whole life. Then it became 6 months, but we were always back and forth. And so there's this sense of anything could change at any moment, and nothing is predictable. And just even that, if I look at my life just in the last 20 years, I've lived in 3 countries. I've had all kinds of different experiences. And having that view of life and that experience of life, that you have to be flexible, that you have to take things as they come, things aren't what you expect them to be, has made it possible for me to thrive in a lot of difficult situations in other countries. And I didn't know it at the time, because when you're growing up, it's just your life, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, but then you see these situations that, and some of them were intentional, where my father would say to me, we're a missionary family and you have a job to do. And he always gave me a job. He did different things, but at one point he was coordinating crusades for Billy Graham. Have you heard of Billy Graham?
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was the youngest in the family, and my sister was older, interested in counseling, so she was given a job with the counselors and all this. And it came to me, and I was like, Dad, what about me? Because they all were doing these big jobs because they were older. And I was 8 years old, so I was like, what am I going to do, right? And I could see his brain thinking like, okay. He goes, you know what you're going to do, Noelle? You're going to be in charge of my briefcase. Now, my father is persnickety and organized. I get it from him. I'm persnickety. My father's very persnickety. And so his briefcase, like nobody touched his briefcase. And it was a 70s briefcase. So it was like this wide, so I could sit on it. So it was like and my father traveled all over the world. He's been in like 35 countries.
Wow.
And so he has stickers on there from all over the world. And so I thought it was so cool. I was like, I get to take care of briefcase. I'm like, all right, I have a job. And so even that idea of that I had a job to do from a very young age. I had something to contribute and I had a job to do. And in those situations, I met with all kinds of unique and unusual happenings, like being suddenly backstage at a major crusade with Billy Graham and all these like big people in Christendom, And I'm sitting there, and I knew my job. I knew I had to like follow my dad quietly and have his stuff ready at the drop of a hat. So I remember being there right in the middle before this big crusade, but they'd been planning for several years with Billy Graham and all these other greats in the room. And they're praying before going on stage. And I was in the middle because I had my dad's briefcase and I sat on it and I just listened. I didn't even close my eyes. I was like, I knew like it was an important
really cool.
moment
Yeah.
and that I was with really godly, amazing people and that something really big was about to happen.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And it was really exciting. And that kind of notion, that flexibility, that expectation that anything could happen really stayed with me throughout my life.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's cool, like the part when you talked about you took like a retrospective view on life and you realized that like God worked in your life without you realizing it at the time. I thought that was really cool, and that's like good in prayer. You can ask God to show you things in your life that have majorly influenced you and changed your life.
Yeah, and you know, I've told you my chicken story. I tell my students my chicken story
The one with
because
the fox.
no, the one when I was in 8th grade, actually, I learned to. I was with a team of. My parents were working with a team.
Oh yeah,
of doctors.
Yeah.
You know, who were the anesthesiologists who worked on Ronald Reagan after he was shot, like top-notch doctors who gave of their time to come to this little village in the jungle and way in the south of Mexico to just do free surgeries. They would literally announce on the radio, okay, today we're doing, if you have a broken limb, come in. And they would just line up and wait with broken limbs and do free. Or today we're doing cleft palate, and just announce it on the radio
That's weird.
through the village.
That's cool.
So in wanting us to experience everything, that one of the doctors looked at me and he said, do you want to come into the surgery? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, definitely. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I was like, oh, yeah, I put in the scrubs, washed up, and I'm sitting there with all the doctors. They very carefully, sliced open the little girl's face and just pulled her whole top of her face flat back. And I was like,
And you watched all that? That's,
it felt like my knees were buckling and I was going to pass out. And I was like, Noelle, you said you could do this, so don't say anything, don't faint, and I was like, okay. And I was very quiet, but they were like casually talking and like pull her whole face back, pull her whole, and you could see all her bones. And I was like,
oh my God.
But yeah, they did this surgery for this little girl. And the next day they were like, would you like to go back in the surgery or you want to help in the kitchen? I was like, oh, I want to experience everything. I'll do the kitchen today. And I was like, sweating like, no, thank you for the surgery. But for the cooking, I was like, oh, this is easy. I love to cook. Like, no problem. She's like, we're going to do chicken. I'm like, sure. And she said, okay, go outside and get the chicken. I said, okay, where is it? Like, is there a freezer in some other room? I mean, like, where? He's like, no, outside. And I was like, oh, okay. So I opened the door and I'm like, where are the chickens? I just see like live chickens running around. He's like, those are the chickens we're going to have for dinner. And I said, what do you want me to do? And he's like, you got to kill the chickens. Anyway, you get the story. I had to kill the chickens, pluck them, gut them. And that made me want to faint more than the surgery, right?
That's funny.
But I learned how to do that. And again, one of those flexible in the moment and then cut to 5 years later. I'm way up outside of Tegucigalpa in Honduras, outside of like hours away from civilization. There's no stores, no electricity, nothing. We're building a schoolhouse for this village, and we ran out of food. So I'm the main translator. So I said, okay, so a couple of people come with me. We're going to walk to the next village because we have to either buy food or, we have to do something, right? Yeah. And people were getting sick and people lost a lot of weight. So I was actually really worried. Yeah. So I go walking the next village, and first, God's provision. I find a matcha banana plant, which are the little ones. And so somebody has a machete. I'm like, give me your machete. So I grab I have a picture. I'm like holding up, I'm like, look at what I found. Bananas, big thing of bananas. So I'm like, okay, we can eat bananas. So that's the first score. I'm like, thank you, Lord, we've got bananas. We get to the village and they're like, we have no food. We have nothing to sell. I'm like, can you sell me anything? Nope, nothing. Jeez. And I look over and I see these two scrawny chickens. And I'm like, what about those chickens over there? And he's like, the guy looks at me and goes, what are you going to do with those chickens? I said, well, I'm going to, wring their necks and pluck them and serve them up to my team. And he's like, all right, I'll sell them to you. I said, okay, deal. I took his two chickens. But I thought that's not enough. So I found a guy who knew a guy. And this was a big risk, right? I mean, all these young college students, myself, a young college student. And I thought, well, I've got money. so I need to get food. So this friend of a friend, he says he has a truck. And I said, I'm going to give you this money. And I looked at him and I said, the Lord is watching you. And he was like, okay, señora. And I was like, I'm telling you, I'm trusting you. I'm giving you this money. Go down to the Tegucigalpa. It's like a 4-hour drive. Buy food, whatever you can get, meat, vegetables, fruit, and bring it up the next village over in Huachipilin. And he's like, okay. And I mean, who knows if I was ever going to see him again. I just gave him a wad of cash, right?
Wow.
It's like,
Was it like a lot?
yeah, it was like, when there was the money I had for the trip. I mean,
that's.
but what was I going to do, right? We needed food.
Yeah.
So I prayed about it. I'm like, Lord, you know what we need. So I grabbed the 2 chickens and my bananas and went back to the village. And we cooked up the chickens because 5 years before I had done it, right?
Yeah.
I killed and gutted a chicken, plucked the fat, like the whole thing, right? So
Your axe was sharp.
my axe was sharp. I was ready, So, and then the next day, so we eat, everybody's happy. We have chicken soup, we have the meat, we eat. Next morning, way off in the distance, we see something coming up the hill. I was like, no way.
No way.
The guy came with his truck full of food.
That's so
Wow,
nice.
look at
That's
that.
divine intervention.
And I said, God bless you. And I gave him a big tip and we had food to eat. But see, that's a looping back. God doesn't waste anything.
Yeah, definitely.
God doesn't waste anything.
That's awesome. I really like that. How many people were on the trip? Like, how many people did the 2 chickens and the you said matcha bananas?
Yeah.
How
Which are
much
the
is,
little, here's a regular, matchas are little, or
Okay.
shorter. And
How many people were on the trip on that when you guys were out there?
We were, like 25 people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But I was the main, I was on the student leadership. It's a student run project at Biola University. But also.
Is that where you went to college?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I was also the main Spanish speaker.
Oh, really?
So I felt like the pressure of
Yeah.
I'm the big communicator. So it's like I had to do everything. And I didn't realize it at the time, like in retrospect, probably, we should have had like 2 or 3 Spanish speakers. But when you speak Spanish, you're like, oh, sure, I speak Spanish. But, when you're speaking for everybody all the time, I felt a lot of pressure.
That makes sense.
for sure.
I was young. I mean, I was 18,
Yeah.
So.
So to go back a little bit, you said you lived in 3 countries in the last couple of years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, so I had to leave Mexico suddenly. You know that story about me held up in gunpoint twice. So I left the country. I came back to Los Angeles. And I lived there for a few years. I met my husband, and he's English. And so actually, we had talked about moving back to Europe. He wanted to live in Europe. But he got a job offer in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico. And it was a really unique opportunity to run a really specialized hotel. It was a small luxury hotel of the world. And it was all Ponzi and like a lot of famous people, with like big wide brim hats. And it was hard because we lived in the hotel. So it was I had no privacy and it was really difficult. And it was a tourist place. So it wasn't like where I grew up.
Yeah.
It was like living in a tourist, right. So it was difficult, but so we lived in Cabo San Lucas, and when we left Cabo San Lucas, we then moved to England. And so my children, I only had my first daughter, my other 2 children, Maya, whom you know, and my son Joseph, who graduated from DC. They were both born in England.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And so they started their education there. And then, again, unexpected events, we ended up moving back to California. And so we've moved out here to Pennsylvania from California.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So my husband and I have lived in Mexico, America, and England.
So is Mexico City, was that your favorite place to live?
Yes. And I say it reluctantly because now that I'm a mother and a wife, I take into consideration like where they would want to live.
Yeah.
And we lived in a tiny little village in England in the countryside, and my children went to preschool on a working farm. And life in Mexico City is like polar opposite isn't far enough, right?
Sure.
And so the thought of, yes, I love this place. I want to be in this place that I know my family would love to visit and be there, but not live there. So it'll always tug at me, I think, in my mind, I remember after Maya was born, actually, I took a train by myself up to London, and they had the largest exhibit that had ever been put on of Frida Kahlo at the Tate Modern in London. So I went up by myself, and I was I just happened to be reading at the time La Casa de los Espíritus by Isabel Allende, very famous book. And I'm reading that, so I'm in that mind of like magical realism. And I'm taking the train up to the Tate Modern to see this largest, most comprehensive exhibit of Frida Kahlo.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I looked out the window and I thought, where am I? And what am I doing here?
Yeah.
Like, where is this place?
Yeah.
Like, I don't belong here. And especially because I was by myself. When I'm with my children, my husband's English, so it connects you,
Yeah.
you know? But in that moment, not having any of my family there and just being by myself, I realized I don't belong here. And nothing about me relates to this place. There was nothing grounding me, because without my husband and my children, it was just me. And I thought, I just want to go home.
Yeah.
Like, I don't belong here. And I went to the exhibit and I bought the whole thing, you know, when you listen to the,
I know
the tour and all that.
Yeah.
And I put it on and I walked in and they started playing mariachi music and talking about Mexico City. And I started to cry. And I was shocked in my own reaction. But it made me realize that when I let myself think about it, and this is true for me here in Pennsylvania, that I'm very other, but that I keep it like in my mind or in my heart, or because there are parts of myself that don't belong here and that nobody would understand really. I mean, I make jokes in class and I talk about things, but I'm not living that way.
Right.
I'm not speaking that way. I'm not existing that way. And so where I'm from is very, very far from here in so many ways, you know, culturally and everything. It's just a different world. So I think there are those moments when you're on your own and you realize I am from somewhere else. I am not from here, which isn't that where God wants us to be? We are travelers in this world, and we are not long for this world.
Yeah.
And our days here are numbered, because our place is in glory with the new heavens, new body, new, you know, and that really has affected my spiritual outlook. It's like, you know, it's okay, because this is not my home.
It's temporary.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So for our viewers who haven't heard this story that you mentioned earlier, could you tell a little bit about when you were held at gunpoint?
2 times.
2 times, yeah. Well, the story I was mentioning earlier, I'd graduated from Biola and I moved back to Mexico City. And I was actually started teaching at the high school I graduated from, because I'd thought about going into teaching. So I was teaching there, and it's a very, very privileged school in a very poor neighborhood. So when you leave the school, it's actually a little bit like dodgy. You know, you're like, you got to leave quickly. So it was winter. It was really cold. I'm leaving the school, and I'm by myself in a big van, and I hear a loud sound, and it's a really like an explosion almost. It was that loud. And because I say a van because the windows are extra large on the van.
Okay.
And I looked and I saw a fist with the knuckles. You know, what do you call those?
Brass knuckles?
The brass knuckles. That's it.
Oh.
He had the brass knuckles on. He went, and the glass, it popped and it went flying everywhere and it covered me. And in my moving and stuff, I got little scrapes and started to bleed. And I was like, you know, your mind is going, what's going on? What's happening
Going
right
to
now?
shock.
Yeah. And I was like, was it an explosion? Was this? But when I saw his hand, I'm like, oh my, he did that on purpose. And he's trying to.
Were you like driving, or were you like at like a stoplight?
I was driving, but I was at a stoplight.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And the joke about Mexico City is it's the largest parking lot in the world because the traffic is so bad. So the light can change 2 times and you're just sitting there. And so they knew that. So I check all my mirrors and I realize they've got me surrounded, except on my door. So in my mind, I was like, okay, the minute he jumps in, I run out, I leave everything. I just didn't want him to hurt me.
Yeah.
So I was ready to like, well, it's that whole like being prepared, like being flexible, right? So immediately my mind is like, how can I get out of this situation?
That's good. Instead of like panicking, you were ready.
So I was like, I'm going to run back. I'm going to jump out and run back to the school. That was my plan. And suddenly the light changed. And he looked at me and he reached in, he grabbed all my stuff on the seat and took off.
Really?
And my heart was racing. I get to the next stoplight and, you know, there are all these people around. If everybody had gotten out of their car, there's like suddenly 30 people. The guy, I mean, didn't stand a chance, but nobody does that.
Yeah.
The crowd mentality of like, somebody else will help or what can I do? And nobody does anything. I get to the next light and this lady rolls down the window. Are you okay? I'm like, well, now she asked, right? And she's like, go home, don't stop. You know, and I said, okay, yes. And so I'm driving home and I'm an hour from the school and I realize My parents are traveling. I'm at home alone. And I started to get a little bit creeped out. But I'm like, I'm just calm. I got to get home. I'm going to be okay. So I'm almost home. And I lived up on a hill. So I turn my car like this. And out of nowhere, this big, black, brand new Suburban cuts me off.
It wasn't the same car that punched in your window?
No, because those guys were on foot.
Oh, they
But
were on foot.
my mind went to that. Like, did they follow me?
Yeah.
But then I had to say to myself, no, they were on foot. This is a car. Again, it feels like long thoughts, but it's seconds. Your brain is like, works very fast. So I'm like, they can't be the same guys. Who are these guys? And I realized these guys are well dressed and they have big guns.
Wow.
They have Uzis, and there are like 6 of them.
Oh,
and they
jeez.
surround my car. Like, there's no way out. So now I'm thinking, I'm going to die.
That's crazy.
'Cause I can't get out.
Guns? That's like,
They have guns.
I wouldn't even know what to think
They
at that
weren't like
point.
the other guys. They literally surrounded every way that I could get out and they had their guns like this pointing at me.
Oh my God.
That's crazy.
And so I thought, well, I don't want them to attack me. I don't want to be hurt. I'd rather be gunned down in the street or be run over. So I thought, all I've got to do is get out of the car and I'll run, and they may chase me and they may shoot me. I'll either die by being shot in the back or run into the road and be run over. Either way, I'm dying, right? All I have to do is get out of the car because I don't want to live. I don't want to live going wherever they're going to take me or whatever they have planned for me or whatever. 6 men with guns. So my only thought is get out of the car and just run. Because there was a main street on either side of me. So I thought,
This is happening the same day as the other story?
same day. It's an hour and a half later.
Crazy.
So I just say to myself, get out of the car. The other thing I thought, now it's taken me a long time to tell you, but these are seconds.
Yeah.
You know, your brain works that fast. And when there's adrenaline, your brain is like on fire. You know, they show in movies clips of like your whole life or whatever. That does happen. Your brain goes that fast.
Jeez.
And so in that moment, I was like, this is the end of my life. I'm 24 years old. No, I was 25. I just turned 25. I'm 25. I've had a great life. I'm thinking all this in like seconds. I've had a great life. I've traveled. I love the Lord. I know I know where I'm going. I know what's going to happen to me in a minute, and I'm okay. And I just remember thinking I've had a great run of it, and I'm thankful. And so I did. I looked up just in my car, and I was like, "Here I come, Jesus!" And I was like, "I'm ready. I was ready for. I could almost like feel the bullets and like the car hitting me because I was like, I'm gonna be either run over or shot down. I'm gonna open the door and run, and I was ready for it. And I think because in my mind, I had come to terms with like death, and felt okay. And felt at peace and reflected on my life and felt like I'm thankful all in like a matter of seconds. So that when the guy, this is so jerky. They all have all these guns, right? And he has to get his gun and tap on my window with his gun. I was like, and that something in me got mad.
Really?
That he did that. I was like, that is so jerky. Like they could just gun me down right now. Instead, he has to like lean in and tap with his gun. So I rolled down my window. And I looked at him and I said in Spanish, I said, who do you think you are?
Oh my God.
I said, I have already been assaulted today. Look at my hair. And he kind of looked at me. There's glass. I had long hair and there's glass dangling from me. And that little scratches where like I itched myself or went like that and the glass scratched me. And he kind of looked at me and I said, look at me. I've already been assaulted. There's glass in my hair. They've stolen everything I have. I have nothing. I had no purse left. I had nothing. If they were to find my body, there'd be no ID on me. I had nothing left.
Yeah.
So I said, I don't know what you want from me, but I said the fact that you and your little friends are surrounding my car for one woman, I said, it's embarrassing. I said, get your friends, get out of here and leave me alone.
Oh my gosh.
And he looked at me kind of in shock. And I looked at him and I said, leave me alone.
Oh my gosh.
And he looked over at all of his friends and whoever they were, and he went like that.
Oh my!
And they all jumped in the car.
Wow.
That was
and he stood there. Yeah. Well, I think, and in that moment, I think, again, when you have the peace of the Lord in your life, like I wasn't fighting for my life. I'd already given up my life. I was ready to die. And I'd already reflected on my life, and I was like, it's all good. And so I think that gave me, it wasn't a panic. I wasn't panicked anymore because it was,
Yeah, death, where's your sting?
right.
It's not
I was
there.
ready to go. And so I think that's what gave me the, the calm.
Yeah.
But he looked at me with his gun pointed at my face, and he just stared at me, and I stared at him. And so I repeated myself. I said, take your gun, get in your car, and leave me alone.
Oh my gosh.
That's just,
And he looked at me, and he put his gun down, and he walked away, and they drove away. When they drove away, I can't explain to you, shaking doesn't quite cut it. I could hardly drive because my hands, my whole
That's
body
crazy.
started, and suddenly the fear, then I
Yeah.
was gripped by fear because I was still alive.
Yeah.
And then I felt very human.
I
I
can't
felt very
imagine
human.
how you
My
must feel.
knees were knocking and I couldn't do the pedal. Like my body, it was like a seizure almost. Like seriously, I was trembling. I can't remember when I've trembled like that. And I was like driving like this and I was like, I could hardly, suddenly I was just gripped with fear. Like, and I'm questions. Who are those guys? Why?
Yeah.
And everybody who hears the story says, what did they want? What did they say?
Yeah,
They
that's right.
never spoke because I did all the speaking.
Exactly.
And I kept saying, leave me alone, get out of here, get in your car. And I was like telling them what to do. I never heard what they wanted or what, I never knew.
wow.
They left.
That's
So
like,
I went up to my
powerful.
house, nobody's there.
Yeah.
And I'm by myself. And then I'm gripped with such fear. I go to my kitchen cabinet, get every knife, big knives that I have. And I stayed up all night looking out the window, waiting for somebody to come back.
Oh my gosh.
Because then I'm like, so they're after me, right? They
Right.
get me at the one side of town, this side of town, like somebody's after. And then I get paranoid, like somebody's after me. Like I said, I became very human.
Yeah.
Like the whole like I'm going to glory. Then I was like this scared human, like
Yeah.
And the next day I packed my bags. I went to stay at a friend's house until
That's
my parents
smart.
came
Yeah.
home. And when my parents came back from America, they said the peso devalued. I lost all my money. I'd go to the bank every day at like 3 a.m. and wait all day, and they'd run out of money and say, "We have no money. The money's
Really?
gone." In the country, it was a huge devaluation.
Wow.
So I lost
Wow,
all
I
my
didn't know
money,
such a thing.
and my dad was like, "This was all happened like 2 weeks after this," and my dad was like, "You can't live here. You cannot. The things have changed politically. It's too dangerous. You were assaulted. Things could have gone so differently. You lost all your money. You cannot live here anymore."
Wow.
So I suddenly, in the middle of everything, just moved back to the States.
That's crazy. That is mind blowing. I wish I could have been like a fly on the wall. in
It
your
would have
car,
been
like,
Seriously.
scary.
I
see
mean-
Mrs. Collins like yell at them in Spanish.
That's like a movie. I mean, I would
I
watch
know
that
it was
in a second.
bizarre, but the minute they drove away, there was nothing like cool. I was just like,
Yeah.
I was like,
In the moment.
the scene ended. I wasn't cool anymore. I was very
cut the
much like
cameras.
scared and like it was gripping fear. Like I could hardly breathe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Yeah. But the Lord is merciful. I mean, these are the things you realize. I mean, the Old Testament talks about the hounds of heaven coming for you. It sounds kind of creepy, but if you think about it, the Lord knows who you are and guides your path even when you don't know it. He's sharpening your axe all the time, all through your life. And, so many moments when you're like, God has kept me alive. He has literally kept me alive. So that helps give purpose to my life. If I have a bad day at school or I'm tired, I'm like, there is purpose and intention to everything that I do and say
Yeah, every day is a blessing.
every day,
Not that-
every day,
just to be
every day.
alive.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a miraculous story. That's really cool. That's like crazy to think about from my perspective, like living in United States and Pennsylvania. It's like I could never imagine that happening, but
Yeah, right.
down in Mexico City, I'm sure it's much different.
Mm. And it also makes you realize, though, this is one little story. There are, refugees,
Yeah.
people who suffer through wars and persecutions all the time right now. I mean, in southern Mexico, the persecution rate for Christians is some of the worst in the world.
Wow.
My mom went to I think I mentioned this to you. She went to a little village when I was in high school that the last Christians that lived there had all been macheted to
Oh
death.
yeah, you told us
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I mean, and this stuff goes on all the time. And we walk around and complain about not having coffee
Yeah.
or about having to do homework or this, that. And we're like, sometimes it's good to span back a little and realize
definitely.
there's a whole world out there that doesn't have the freedom and the resources that we
Yeah.
have here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's grateful.
Yeah, gratefulness is definitely like super important.
Yeah.
So like when you went through an event like that, it gives you perspective. But
Yep.
I think one tool that can be really helpful for people who maybe do live a more mundane life is think about if that were to happen to you. Like everything that you have is temporary, and just because you have it and have had it doesn't mean you will. So think to yourself at any given moment, like all of this could just be gone.
Yeah. It all goes.
Death
I mean,
is
think
just-
about this. When you die, you never see a big moving trailer attached to a hearse. You don't take anything with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
You don't take anything with you. It's
Good
all
perspective.
temporary, I mean, my mom taught me this. She would, on the mission field, other people would need like china for a birthday party or a special dish or whatever. She'd let people come to I'd watch them. They'd come to my house and pack up all of our nice china
Really?
that my mom got as a wedding gift, and my mom would lend it to them. But, it was such an example to me to hold loosely to our possessions,
Yeah.
because I learned from her, and I've done that many times. I've had friends say, oh, I wish I had special dishes. And I say, come use whatever, borrow. If you like what I have, borrow what I have. They bring a box and pack up all my china and use it.
Really? That's
Because,
awesome.
what if I die tomorrow? My china's just sitting in my
Yeah.
cabinet collecting dust.
There
If
you
you
go.
need it, use it,
That's cool.
So we have to hold lightly to all these. I love my things just like everybody else. I
Yeah.
enjoy my home and all my junk. But it is that. They're just things.
Yeah.
So they can be gone tomorrow. And so I'd rather share them
Yeah.
and let other people enjoy the things that I get to enjoy too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. I think more people need that mindset. I mean, it's great. If everybody was like that, I mean, society would just be that much better.
People would be taken care of, right?
Yeah.
But isn't that
Also-
what that God calls us to that in Acts?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Says share everything you have.
Showing
Nobody
glory to
should
God,
be
too.
hungry, right?
Mhm.
Nobody should be, so we should always be thinking that way. What do we have that we can share with others?
Yeah.
Mm.
But didn't you have another story when you were teaching elementary school, you had another story. I forget. Was it an earthquake or a fire, or was it like
I've
an
had a
intruder
couple
or
of gun
something?
stories. Yeah, an
you
intruder, and
told
then
me
one
that.
with a parent who came after me with a gun because
Oh my
he was
goodness.
abusive, and I helped his wife get away. Basically,
really?
gosh.
Yeah, and it was in the inner city. I taught in the very rough part of town, and he came for me with a gun. He's like, "Where is Mrs. Collins?" And he found my room, and he was like banging on the door with his gun. Yeah, I climbed out I had to go Army style and climb out the window.
Oh,
Because,
that's-
of course,
I remember
in the
you
inner
told
city, my
armor
intercom didn't
Yeah.
work. This is before cell phones, so I was like, okay, I don't want this guy to kill me. So.
Wait, so you were in a classroom? That
Mhm.
happened?
It was before I taught first grade. It was before the day started.
Okay, so there's
so the
no
bell
students in
hadn't
the
rung yet.
classroom.
No students in there yet, thank God.
Yeah.
And I had helped his wife get to a shelter.
Really?
Yeah. He was very abusive. I first noted it in my student. It was a really hot day, and she had tights on. And I could tell by her demeanor that she had a lot of emotional issues,
Aw.
and I was really concerned for her. So, legally, I can't lay a hand on her. I can't. So
Yeah.
I took her to the nurse. I said, "Come to the nurse with me. You don't seem to feel well today." And I knew she wouldn't say no to me because she was very shy and timid. And if I made a loud noise and sound she would get so sick. And I was
Really?
like, this is
That's
not
so
right. There's
sad.
something not
Yeah.
right.
It's horrible.
And so we went to the nurse, and I said to the nurse in English, because taught a bilingual class, and she only spoke Spanish. So I said in English, I said, "I need you to check her legs. I'm just going to tell you that she fell, and I need you to check her legs because she has all the signs of
Yeah.
abuse, and I need you to."
Oh, so the girl couldn't understand because she only spoke
No.
Spanish.
And so I said,
That's smart.
"Oh, Jessica, I think you fell." So the nurse is going to check. And I knew she wouldn't say no to
Yeah.
me. She was so shy. And she was like, "Okay." And so the nurse checked her legs. And
Aw.
wow, I was like,
That's heartbreaking.
yeah,
That-
it was
that's
heartbreaking.
terrible. To think
Yeah, I used
about.
to go home crying all the time when I
Aw.
taught
Mm.
that year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just talked to her mom. I said, legally, I should have called the police right then and there. But they would come take her away and put her in foster care with somebody.
Yeah.
So I waited. And this is where, I wasn't trying to break the law. I was trying to use the law to benefit the
Yeah,
child.
strategically. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Strategically. So I waited, and I told the mom, I said, "I can give you 24 hours, and that's it. Here's what I need you to do. You need to get your passport, your birth certificates for you and your children, and I will find you a place to go. But I can only give you 24 hours. You have to decide right now." And at first she said no. And I
Really?
leaned in and I was like, why wouldn't you take my help? And I leaned in and I looked at her face and realized she had a scar like this. And I looked at her and I said, you have been hurt.
Yeah.
And she started to cry. And I said, when you're hurt like that, who's taking care of your kids? I said, you and your children need to, you know. So she got away and he came after me with a gun.
Wow.
And it was really cool because a year later, her cousin who went to the school, I get this
little girl's cousin?
Yeah, I get this little note like, Mrs. Collins, can you meet me in, you know, the 5th grade room or whatever during lunch? And I was like, okay, yes, top secret. But then I get there and it's Jessica's cousin.
Mm.
And she said, Senora Collins, I had to wait till it was safe. It had been a year. She said, but I want you to know that Jessica and her mom and her brothers and sisters are all safe.
Aww.
They live an hour up north.
That's
they
awesome.
have a new life and they're doing well. And they wanted me to tell you.
Aw,
So
That's incredible.
that's so cute.
I was so
I love
thankful.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like
Yeah.
the moments life doesn't even prepare you for, like to
Oh,
recognize those
yeah.
signs of abuse.
Well, I do have, my father's a marriage and family therapist. My sister's a clinical psychologist, and I was a sociology major and took a lot of
Okay.
psych classes. So I do have a little bit of a background to
definitely.
like pick up on some things.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's I can't even have words for it. I mean, it's brutal and so painful, and you realize how broken the world is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That children are hurt,
It,
innocent
Yeah.
children.
it blows me
And
away that they would still like choose to stay.
Yeah, what's the
all that.
abusive cycle?
Right.
You know, you
like the
think, what am
Stockholm
I going to do?
syndrome.
Yeah, what am I going to do? And then these are people very low income who don't have a lot of resources, so you're scared. You know,
Yeah,
the guy
you
says,
don't know what to do
You
after
leave
you
here,
leave.
I don't give you a penny. You don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They really would be on the street. You know,
Mhm.
and she didn't speak English to know that there are resources available to her. There are shelters. You know, she didn't know. She didn't understand all that.
Right.
So, you know,
That's an
Anyway,
that's an amazing story. I love that.
there's always people need help. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your parents were missionaries your whole life. So you've
Mhm.
known Christ like your whole life ever since
Mhm.
a young girl. That's really cool.
Mhm. I
That's
would
awesome.
say though, like with anything else, you can know something like when you learn something in a book, and then you can understand something,
Mhm.
right? And so I think as you grow up, as you start to get older and come into your own, apart from your parents, you grow in understanding for yourself and for your own life. And it's something I see as very pivotal. Even the age I teach here at DC, being in high school, I feel like that's a pivotal age where you're trying to come into your own. And I know there's a lot of like, it's natural. You push back because you want to come into your own. But it's really important to bring with you those things of life,
Yeah.
like your faith, and make it your own before you completely head out on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the work of the journey of, you know, following Christ
Mhm.
for ourselves and understanding for ourselves who God is and who He calls us to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you want to share the other story about the earthquake that you were in Mexico City, you were talking about.
Oh, the big earthquake in Mexico City.
Yeah.
That was the year before I went to, the year before I graduated. So I was a junior, my end of my junior year
In high school.
in high school. Yeah. So you guys are sophomores.
Sophomores.
Sophomores. So I'd be a year older than you.
Okay.
Huge. I went to school, the same school I was telling you that I taught at an hour from my home. And my father's office for the ministry was downtown, not far from where I went to school. And sometimes he drove me and sometimes I took the bus. And in this case, I took the bus. And he told me, I'm driving in, I'll pick you up at the end of the day. So I knew he was going in. So I leave for the day. And the earthquake happens while I'm on the bus. And at first, we didn't realize it was an earthquake because the bus was going crazy.
Oh wow.
And we were holding on. And we were like, wow, the roads are so bad. It's so scary. Like, we thought it was some crazy, like, wild bus ride,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, right.
It was the earthquake. So we get to school, ghost town. Nobody's there. No
Oh.
grown-ups. I mean, nobody. We're just like
That's
a bus
scary. Yeah.
full of
Mm.
kids. And, you know, I told you that it's on the wrong side of town. So we were like,
Yeah, that's not a good situation.
you know, the guard wasn't there, like nobody was there.
Yeah.
And what was odd is we then realized at that point, Mexico City was the largest city in the world, and it was silent.
That's
Wow.
silent.
people
And
at your
for
school.
minutes,
Did
for
they get the
minutes.
memo? Did they know? Like,
No,
not
I
to
mean
go to
this
school?
is all before cell phones and
Yeah.
stuff.
Right.
So like, and immediately it was so bad, all the phone lines went down.
Okay.
So there's no way to communicate except telepathically. There's no way to communicate.
So how did all the other people at school know not to go? Why was
No,
it?
they were in the earthquake.
Oh.
Oh, they didn't even.
Yeah,
they couldn't even get to school.
there were car crashes,
Oh,
roadblocks,
wow.
buildings fell. Like nobody made it in.
So it was like a
Jeez.
huge.
Oh, it was
earthquake.
massive.
Wow.
It was 9 point something on the Richter scale.
my
It was huge.
gosh.
Yeah, it was
Whoa.
huge. It destroyed the city, and immediately reports went out all over the world that Mexico City had been flattened and there were hardly any survivors. That was the first news reel that went out. So my brother's at Biola, my sister's at Wheaton, and they both cried. They said, "We know they're dead," because my sister goes to school right in the heart of the city, which was the worst. And my father works there, and they were like, they didn't even think we were alive.
Yeah.
And so nobody, well, I just stood there we were like, the earth had gone silent, and it was so scary. We knew it was bad. It was worse than what we had imagined. And it took a good 15 minutes before in the distance we heard one single siren. And it just felt like everybody had died.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And we didn't no place to go. We had nothing. So we just all sat there.
Wow, that must have been super like sobering.
It was numbing too. Like we didn't know would anybody ever come for me. You know,
Yeah.
I was just sitting there like,
Oh
Wow.
and in my mind, I thought, I don't think my dad would have died. Like I just thought, I don't think my dad made it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if my mom was alive. And I just sat there all day. And then finally, people started leaving one by one. And I just thought, I have no money. I don't know what to do. And my mom always said, if you're on your own, find a church or a hospital. So I went outside the school, and I told you it wasn't a great area, but I walked down to the hospital, and the hospital was open. And I talked to the lady there, and she said, it's really bad. Everybody's dead. And I said, okay, can I wait in the basement? And I said, can you give me, back then it was a little quinto, a little 10 cent, whatever, to make a phone call.
Yeah.
And I said, can you give me a dime, the equivalent of a dime, to make a phone call? And she said, yes, but the power lines are down. So I didn't get a hold of anybody, and I waited there for hours.
Wow.
And then my parents walked in, and I cried my eyes out. And
Aw.
I said, Dad, I thought you were dead. He said he was walking out the door. And he said, I don't know. I just suddenly stopped and said, I'm not going to go in today.
Those are the craziest. stories.
Because his building was flattened to
Oh
the ground.
my gosh.
Wow.
He would have been like squashed. And I knew that in my mind. So in my mind, I was so like numb. I was like, nobody's coming for me. They're all dead.
Mhm.
But my parents came for me after I waited all day at the hospital down underground. And they were both alive. It took us hours to get home. So cut to the end of that first week, because of my parents being missionaries and all our, relief work activity, we were dealing with like literally there were piles of dead bodies, and we had to like move the bodies so they could get to the rubble. There were people still alive. It was crazy. And people were working all through the night. So we were part of that relief effort. And by the end of the week, honestly, I was tired, but also was a little bit traumatized.
I'm sure.
There were a lot of like dead bodies. It was rubble. It was so overwhelming, and it was a bit much. And so at the end of that week, just for like people's mental health, the mall near my house was completely closed, but there was a little cafe at the edge of the mall. And they said, we're going to open the cafe just to give people a place to go because it's been so horrible, So they opened this little cafe. My dad had a big meeting. He said, I'll drop you off there with your friend. We had been doing relief work all day. He's like, why don't you go sit there, have a coffee? I'll have my meeting and I'll come back for you. So I'm sitting there. We order our coffee. We're sitting there. And suddenly I hear a noise. Have either of you been in an earthquake?
I mean, a really minor one. But
not-
not
I think
Okay, when it's
bad
a
at all.
really bad one, this is twice. It's happened to me in LA as well. You can hear the grinding in the earth under your feet. You can hear the like the earth is churning, and we all looked down to the floor at our feet because you could hear the sound of the earth.
That's weird.
And suddenly everything starts to shake like this, and suddenly it started to bounce, and the ceiling started to fall in, and wood planks start to fall, and everything starts to And then it becomes like a scene from a movie where
Yeah, I
everybody
can-
gets up, they're yelling and screaming,
Yeah.
and it turns into mayhem fast.
Wow.
And in
I
that
can, like, see
moment,
that in my head. Yeah.
yeah. And in that moment, I have always thought I would save people, right? I'd go back
Superhero.
for a little
Yeah.
girl and like put her on my back and like that,
Yeah,
right?
what
Run
everybody
for the
always
door.
thinks.
Right. So let me tell you what really happened. I ditched my friend, didn't even like look at her, think of her, calling names. She's like, you disappeared. Like, I don't even remember seeing you leave. You
Oh
left
my
so fast.
gosh.
Adrenaline, fight or flight. I ran. And I ran to the door. And who was in front of me but this poor old lady
Oh.
with a soft fur coat. And I remember her
Aw.
coat because I remember how it felt when I grabbed it and climbed over her, climbed over this poor woman. I mean, when I think about it, it's just
Oh
so
my gosh.
embarrassing, you know? Like I can remember how her coat felt
That's so
because I
funny.
grabbed it and all I could think was
Oh,
get out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I didn't think about anything else except get out of this falling building. And I did. I got out. And then when I got out, I ran and didn't even look back. It was just sheer adrenaline, just like, psh. My friend was like crying. She's like, you left me. I was like, what? I'm sorry. What? Like, I don't even know. Like an old lady. I was like, and then again, adrenaline, no logic, just adrenaline. Everybody's out now. We all got out. We're safe. We're all standing there. People go to their cars. We're standing there. And then I take off again. And my poor friend is so traumatized. I take off and I run back into the building.
Oh.
What?
You know why? Because I hadn't paid the bill. So I ran in to an
What?
empty building, all with like wires hanging and like wood
No.
planks and dust everywhere. Grab all the money in my pocket, leave it on the table,
Oh my gosh.
and run back. Like I could have died.
yeah.
Yeah, that
Like-
was.
What was again when adrenaline kicks in at that level? It's not logical. People say, "Oh, if I would do this, if I were in this situation," I'm like, well, it's hard to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
It's hard
Been there,
to
done
say.
that. Yeah.
It's hard to say because when fight or flight kicks in, you know, so I run back in, I leave my money, I come back out. And my friend now is like, what is wrong with you? And I was like, I hadn't paid.
Wow.
So I paid, I come out, and now everybody's gone. And it's just the two of us in this parking lot.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh no, is my dad coming back for us? What if he died? Where's my mom? Like, you know, and this relates back to what we've been talking about this whole time, that in that moment, in everything that was going on in the city and all the people who had died, like, was that the most important thing, the way I felt and what I needed? Like, looking back, I would say, not really, right? People had lost their lives. People were like, you know, it was a really desperate situation. There was no contact. There were phones lines were down. There were people didn't have water, food. I mean, but in that moment, I needed to hear my mom's voice, and I needed to know that she was alive and that I was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I just needed that. And it, to me, reflecting back on it, the fact that God, you know, gave me that peace of mind when I didn't have it. And I needed to hear my mom's voice.
Mm.
And so I went to the payphone, and my friend said, well, there's no phone line. And I was just ignoring her. And she was like, there is no phone line. And I just picked up the phone. I did not hear a ringtone. Phone was dead. But I just kept dialing my number, 379-620-4379. I just kept dialing it. Like, just not even, I just was dialing it. And then suddenly I heard a voice,
Wow.
Noelle. And I said,
Oh my
Mom?
gosh.
And she said, are you okay? And I started crying. And I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
I ran out and the building was falling apart. And then I ran back in and I, you know, are you okay? Where's Dad? And he's like, he'll come for you. Just stay where you are. He will come for you. He'll find you. And I was like, we're out here by ourselves on the street. There's nobody here. And like, and she's like, oh, just sit. Dad will find you. So I said, okay. So we hang up. My dad comes for us. We get home. My friend gets home, you know. Weeks later, my mom and I are sitting in the kitchen. And there's still no phone service anywhere in Mexico. We had to ham radio through missionaries all around the world who ham radio to get to my brother and sister to say that we were alive. And when they heard that we were alive, it had been several months after the earthquake. They didn't know. My
crazy.
sister remembers where she was at Wheaton when she heard that we were alive. She was
Wow.
so sad. I mean, crying, you know.
Yeah.
But I said to my mom, we're sitting there in the kitchen, and I said, Mom, remember 2 weeks ago when I was it was called Cafe Mozart. When I was at Cafe Mozart, she's like, yeah. And I said, well, did you hear the phone ring at home? She said, no, I didn't. And I said, why did you pick up the phone? She said, I don't know. I was walking by the phone and I just picked it up and I
Wow.
heard your voice. And I said, but there were no phone lines. She said, yeah, there are no phone lines. And we looked at each other and she said, did you
What?
hear a ringtone? And I said, no, I just suddenly heard your voice.
What?
And then we
Oh my
realized
gosh.
in that moment that really like Jesus connected the call.
Oh my God.
There were no
literally.
phone
That
lines.
gave me chills.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the
Crazy.
Lord gave us, and again, I feel almost, with all the suffering and everything going on, listened to my cry, to my need.
Yeah.
It was like this little mental health issue with all this stuff going
Holy
on.
moly.
Yeah.
And the Lord hooked us up and
Yeah.
Yeah.
talked to
Definitely.
each other.
Provision.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much for coming on. It was great to hear your stories.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
It
thank
was
you
fun
so
to
much.
be here.
Of course.
So amazing.
Look forward to having you in Spanish.
Yeah. Those are some crazy, like, divine intervention. Like,
Mm.
God put all these things in your path, but they
Yeah, I feel like I just watched a movie just
Yeah,
by
I
hearing
know.
it.
could have a movie
Let's
about
bring
you.
popcorn next
Yeah.
time.
Exactly.
Yeah, really.
It is my favorite
Yeah.
snack. Anyway,
Exactly.
thanks again for
Yeah,
having
thank
me.
you
I
so much.
appreciate
Yeah,
it. It's
thanks
been
for
fun.
coming
on. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.